Okay, we are on our third video here, and today we're going to actually be diagramming a couple of passages here. It's actually one long passage. It's going to be 3 verses, and we'll look at that in a minute. But before we get started, I did want to go over a little bit more about the basic parts of speech, because there are some things that you do need to know in order to be able to diagram something. And again, let me just throw out the disclaimer that I'm not an expert at grammar at all. I am not an expert diagrammer. I feel like I have enough grasp on the basics to be able to do a video like this. But if you do need to refresh yourself on grammar, English grammar particularly, I would suggest the site EnglishGrammarRevolution.com. That's what I use quite a bit when I have any kind of questions about grammar or even diagramming. They got a whole section on diagramming there. I will go to that site and look up the information, and the web address is English-Grammar-Revolution.com. It's a wonderful site, and if you're English, especially if English is not your first language, and you're struggling to learn it, this will give you all the details on English grammar, how to diagram, the different parts of speech, how they interact with one another. So it's a really good site to do this. And so I posted kind of a poll, I guess you could say, in the Logos tips and tricks page, and asked people if they would rather see me diagram our passage in Logos or on letsdiagram.com. Now, letsdiagram.com is a web app that actually lets you do traditional Reed Kellogg diagrams like we're going to be doing. The difference here is Logos here, the different shapes are not set up for Reed Kellogg. So in other words, if you're used to seeing diagrams from grade school, you're used to seeing the words on slanted lines and turned sideways. Well, Logos doesn't have that capability, but they do have all the shapes that we need. So all the feedback that I got said they would rather see this in Logos, and which makes sense because we are using Logos and we need to learn how to use this tool that's within this Logos diagram. But I do like to use both Logos and letsdiagram.com just to kind of keep myself sharp, hopefully. I don't know how sharp I am, but I like to keep myself as sharp as I can get. But anyway, let's jump into this. This is going to be a long video, so if you want to watch about half of it and then take a break and come back to it later, great. But it's going to be a long one today. So here's what we're doing. We're going to go over the different basic parts of speech, and we're going to go over clauses, and then we're going to go over the 8 parts of speech that are common in the English language. So let's get started here. First thing you have here, we need to understand that the different types of clauses, 2 types of clauses. And actually, maybe I shouldn't call them types, because there's a lot of types. You have adjectival clauses, you have adverbial clauses, you have just different types. But I would say 2 categories, I guess, would be the best way to put it. But the 2 categories of clauses are independent and dependent. And they function exactly like they're named. Independent clauses are clauses that can make a complete sentence by themselves. So when you hear somebody say they stand alone, what they're talking about is that independent clauses can make a complete sentence by themselves. So if we're talking and I say, Jesus saves sinners, that is a complete sentence in and of itself. It needs no further explanation for you to understand what I'm talking about. Dependent clauses, on the other hand, are clauses that have to have another clause to help them complete the meaning. So again, imagine that you and I are talking, and I say, by dying on a cross. Now, if you're a Christian, you're going to understand what I mean, but you're still going to be like, huh? Why in the world did he say that? Because what I said, by dying on a cross, isn't a complete sentence in and of itself. It can't stand alone and make a complete thought. However, if I say Jesus saved sinners by dying on a cross, you would say, aha, that's correct. See, so you have an independent clause being coupled with a dependent clause to make a whole idea there. So those are basically your 2 types of clauses. Independent can make a complete sentence by itself. And dependent, it has to have something else in order to make a complete thought. So now, very quickly, I want to move on to the 8 parts of speech. There are basically 8 parts, and I'm going to just call them out for you here, and then we'll go over each one. You have nouns, pronouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, prepositions, conjunctions, and interjections. And as you can see on the screen here, a couple of them have several underneath of them, and we're going to go over each of these one at a time here. And hopefully this will clarify some things for you and even help you in your writing and help you in your understanding of language, or at least the English language, a little bit better. So the first thing we have is a noun. A noun is basically a person, place, or thing. So if I say a table is a noun, chair, desk, computer, all of these are things. If I say Tom or Susie, those are people. That's a person. If I say a place, Washington, that is a place. Virginia, that is a place. All of these things are nouns. So basically the idea is that it's any person, place, or thing. And then underneath noun, you have pronouns. Now pronouns are nouns that stand in the place of another noun. So there are 3 types of pronouns. So you have personal pronouns, you have demonstrative pronouns, and you have relative pronouns. Now, I'm going to go over all 3 of these very briefly. I hope you'll follow along. I'm trying to make this as quick as possible so the video isn't an hour long. But anyway, personal pronouns would be words like I, me, he, she, it. They're nouns that stand in place of other nouns. So if I say Paul is tall, he is over 6 feet. So the word he there is the personal pronoun that's standing in place of the noun Paul. Okay, that way I don't have to keep repeating the word Paul over and over again in order to make sense of what I'm saying. So I would say something like Paul is tall. Paul is over 6 feet. Paul enjoys playing basketball. I wouldn't have to do that. I could just say Paul is tall. He is over 6 feet. He enjoys playing basketball. And even though I've substituted the word he for Paul, you still understand that I'm talking about Paul. That's kind of what personal pronouns do. They take the place of a thing or another person and use another word in its place, and you'll still understand what they're talking about. And then you have demonstrative pronouns. Now, demonstrative pronouns are simply, they're pronouns that point to things. And the 2 most common are this and that. So if I say this book, that table, or that chair. So if we're talking in a sentence and I point to something and I say, hand me that book. Well, if I'm pointing to it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's not just any random book, it's that book. And if I say, sit in this chair, you know what chair I'm talking about because I'm telling you it's this one. It's not any of the other ones at the table, it's this one. And so that's what demonstrative pronouns do, is they point to things. Then you have relative pronouns. Now, relative pronouns, kind of like personal pronouns, but a little bit different. The best way to understand a relative pronoun is that it's relative to the person or to the thing that it's talking about. So an example, I could say the Greek teacher who teaches first period is no longer with us. So when I say who or whom, you know the who is pointing back to that teacher. So in a way, it kind of works as like a personal pronoun, and it renames it, but it's more or less in relation to who that teacher is. So your most common relative pronouns are who, whom, which, and sometimes the word that. And I say sometimes because the word that doesn't always function as a relative pronoun. The word that you saw up here can be a demonstrative. Now, how do you determine whether the word that is functioning as a relative pronoun? Well, there's a simple way to do that. You would take a sentence and you would take, if it had a relative pronoun, you could substitute the word that for a relative pronoun. And if the sentence still makes sense, then you know it's functioning as a relative pronoun. If it doesn't make sense, it's probably has another function that it's functioning as. So let's take our sentence that I just did. The Greek teacher who teaches first period is no longer with us. Now, let's say it's the Greek teacher that teaches first period is no longer with us. Let me rephrase that there. So if I take the word that and replace it with who, let's say the word that is in a sentence. The Greek teacher that teaches first period is no longer with us. I can take the word that and substitute a relative pronoun. The Greek teacher who teaches first period is no longer with us. And they make sense. It makes sense to use the word that or the word who. And so I understand that if the sentence had the word that in it, that particular sentence, then it is functioning as a relative pronoun because it still makes sense. Now, if I say, sit in that chair, and you say, okay, is this functioning as a relative pronoun or has it got another function? You could just take the word that and substitute it with a relative pronoun, one of the relative pronouns. Sit in who chair? Or sit in which chair? Well, you know that doesn't make sense. So you know the word that is not functioning as a relative pronoun in that sentence. It's got another function to it. It's either functioning like a conjunction or it's functioning as a demonstrative or something else, but it's not functioning as a relative pronoun. So whenever you run across the word that in a sentence, just substitute it with one of the relative pronouns. The most commons are who, whom, which. Just substitute it with one of the relative pronouns and see if the sentence still makes sense. And if it still makes sense, then more than likely it's functioning as a relative pronoun. And I say more than likely because not always. But the majority of the time, if it makes sense, it's going to be functioning as a relative pronoun. So those are your three types of personal pronouns. Three types of pronouns: personal, demonstrative, and relative. Then you have verb. No need to go over verbs too much. Verbs show action or a state of being, and I think we went over the types of verbs last time. I don't quite remember. I think I did go over participles and infinitives and finite verbs. They're going to be your three main verbs that you run into. There's not too much to say about that. They just show action. They show a state of being. They help complete a thought. So that's just the nature of a verb. So then you have adjectives, and adjectives are words that modify some type of other noun. So in the sentence, or the phrase, I should say, the tall man, the word tall is describing man. So it's qualifying man by telling us something about the man, that the man is tall. So the word tall is an adjective. Then you have adverbs, and adverbs most of the time are going to modify other verbs, and they tell us how a verb is carried out. So the sentence, let's take the sentence, the man walked slowly. Okay, the word slowly is describing for us, telling us how the man walked. And most English adverbs are going to have the ly on the end to tell us that, but there are other types of adverbs that will not end with a typical ly. But for now, just know that most of them are going to end in ly. Then you have prepositions. Prepositions are words that show the relationship between the preposition and another noun. Preposition, you'll always have a prepositional phrase, and a prepositional phrase will always have an object to it called the preposition, the object of the preposition. Well, the object of the preposition is not the noun we're looking at to show relationship. And let me give you the example here in the sentence, the book was under the tree. Okay, so your prepositional phrase is under the tree. However, the preposition under is showing its relationship to the noun book. Okay, it's telling us where that book is. It's under the tree. And so that's what prepositions do. They take that word and show its relationship to another noun. So you could say the book was under the tree, the book was on the table. So it's showing us a relationship between the book and the table. The book was in the chair. It's showing us the relationship between the book and the chair. The book was on the wall, if that's possible. It's showing us relationship between the book and the wall. So basically that's what prepositions do. Then you have conjunctions, and conjunctions are just linking words. They link clauses and lists and things like that together. So if I say, I went to the store, I bought milk and bread and cereal. That word and is linking that list together. I bought these three things: milk and bread and cereal. So they link lists together. Most commonly, they link clauses together. And so there are three types of conjunctions that you need to be aware of. The first one are coordinating conjunctions. And coordinating conjunctions do exactly what their name is. They coordinate clauses, but more importantly, they link two independent clauses together. So remember our two types of clauses: independent, and an independent clause is a clause that makes a complete sentence. So let's look at our example here. Jesus is the Savior of the world, and he died on the cross. So you have two independent clauses here, and we know they're independent because they make sense by themselves. Jesus is the Savior of the world. He died on the cross. Those are two independent clauses. So this word and here, this conjunction and, is linking these two independent clauses together. Therefore, it is a coordinating conjunction. There are several coordinating conjunctions that you need to know, and an easy way to remember that is to remember the acronym FANBOYS. Okay, FANBOYS. FANBOYS is for, and, not, but, or, yet, so. So FANBOYS. So that's the easiest way to remember your coordinating conjunctions. However, don't assume that if you see one of these words that's automatically coordinating something, because a couple of these can be used as other types of conjunctions. And so we need to really look and make sure that it's coordinating independent clauses together and not subordinate clauses. Which brings us to our next type of conjunction, and that is a subordinating clause. A subordinating clause links a subordinate clause to an independent clause. So, or I should say, a subordinate clause links an independent clause and a dependent clause together, is what I should have said. I said subordinate clause, but I should have said a dependent clause is what I meant. But they subordinate a dependent clause to an independent clause. So the sentence here: Jesus saved the world while he was dying on a cross. So this "while he was dying on a cross" doesn't make sense by itself, because I can't say while he was dying on a cross. And again, it's kind of like the first example I gave of the dependent clause way back at the beginning of this video. If you're a Christian, you'd understand what I was saying, but you would probably be like, okay, well, why is he saying that? But then this clause right here, while he was dying on a cross, is being linked to Jesus saved the world. And this conjunction while is acting or linking these two clauses together, subordinate and this independent. And then last but not least, here under the conjunctions, you have correlative conjunctions. And correlative conjunctions are paired conjunctions, basically. And a paired conjunction would be something like either or, and not, but so, either or. So the example is, you may have either the cake or the pie. So either or, and that sentence right there, they're paired conjunctions, and so they're correlating those two ideas there. You can have either this or this. And then last but not least on our parts of speech, interjections. Interjections are words that show exclamation. So wow would be an interjection. Now, I do not have an example of an interjection in the verses that we're going to be diagramming, but just know that they are diagrammed differently because typically they're just one word. An example in Scripture would be when you see the word behold. Usually behold is going to be an interjection in and of itself. And so they're just diagrammed on a line, on a single line, above the rest of the sentence. Or above the rest of the clause that's beginning it. So let's go ahead and jump right into our diagram here. And I've already got it partway set up. And what we're going to be looking at is 1 John 1, verses 5 through 7. And I've got the word line here because it's a line diagram. So this had enough examples of the parts of speech that we did for me to do it. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to set up my page here. And one of the things I want to do is I always give my page narrow margins. So if you go under page here, I always give mine narrow margins, 1/2 inch. And I always go landscape. And typically, if I need this to move over more, you can drop down a letter and you can change this to tabloid or A4. Right now, I think we're just going to leave it letter. I think that's what we need. And so I'm going to come over here to insert passage. And I'm going to type in 1 John 1, 5 through 7. Hit enter. I don't want the Greek. This is the Greek SBL. I was playing around with that earlier, but I'm going to go to the ESV. So it's 1 John 1, 5 through 7, ESV. And you want to make sure here, too, if you're going to do a traditional diagram, you want to make sure it's line diagram, because if you drop this down, you see text flow diagramming. And that's a little bit different. But right now, we're just doing line diagrams, so make sure it's set for line. You can have a manuscript. You cannot have a manuscript. A manuscript basically would be a Greek manuscript or another type of manuscript, which shows, you can show how you want it. You can show the lemma. You can show the Greek lemma translated. You can show all kinds of things up above, or that would be under the display. You would show it alternate above or alternate below primary, but we're not going to mess with all that. We're just doing this here, and we're going to go ahead and insert the passage. So it's 3 verses here, and this doesn't look like a lot, but it is a lot. It's going to be a lot diagram, as you're going to see, and it's going to take us a minute to do this. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit Command A on a Mac, and will be Control A on a PC, and it highlights. You see it highlighted every word. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of this, I'm going to move it over here kind of out of the way and just click off of it. Then I'm going to take this 5 here, because this is going to be the beginning of verse 5, and we're going to go up here. Now, a good thing to do before you start diagramming is always find your main subjects and your main verbs, okay? Or, you want to start with, your subjects and your verbs. That's the best way to start. And any objects. So let's read this passage real quick together. We'll just do verse 5. This is the message we have heard from him and proclaim to you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. So that's the end of verse 5. That's what we're taking first. So the first thing we want to do is we want to find our subject and our verb and our objects, if there's any objects to go with it. And so when you're diagramming a subject and a verb, you always start on a horizontal line with a line in between them. Okay? And you can see here subject and predicate. Predicate is just another way of saying verb. And so here we have right here, this is the message. So I'm wondering, this, remember we said, could be a demonstrative pronouns, but demonstrative pronouns can function as subjects. That's just part of what nouns do. They can pretty much function in any type of capacity other than being a verb. And so we know is here is our verb. So I'm going to go ahead and move is over here. And so we have to determine whether message is the subject or the word this is the subject. I'm going to go ahead and go with this being the subject. Okay. And I do that because actually when I went to research this a little bit more, the only example I could find was this is the house that Jack built. Well, in that one they had this as the subject, and then with that as a secondary clause, with that being the direct object. But that wasn't quite the example that I was looking for, but I felt confident enough to say that I felt like that the word this was acting as a subject. So I'm just going to scoot this down, try to condense space here. And then remember, I told you in the last video that if you hover your mouse over each of these shapes, it will tell you what they're for. And so, that's kind of what you can do. And again, I wouldn't worry too much about predicate nominative. I think predicate nominative would be more like if Jesus is God. Okay, that's how you would use this shape here rather than using direct object, because God is not really a direct object. So this one is more for what we call stated verbs. It's giving a state of, it's renaming a person and qualifying, telling us more about the person, but it's also showing a state of being at the same time. And so anyway, the word message is a direct object. And so that's our direct object one. So all you got to do on Logos is click. And once you click, you can drag it out and put it on here. And you see this word direct object here. And it's going to disappear when we put this on. Now, we don't drop the message on. We just need the noun, message. And so if message, or if the word the isn't a noun, then what is it? Well, in English, well, really in any language, you have something called definite articles. And a definite article is basically the word the. Okay, the. And so you take these extra words that we have here and they're qualifying or they're modifying another word. And the word they're modifying, this word the is modifying message. So we're going to put that underneath of the word message. So I'm going to take this and put it here and drop this here. One thing I love about the shapes here is you can do as long or as wide as you need to. I don't need it that wide because the is not a big word. So, and it is showing that it's underneath of this. Okay, this is the message. Now here we have a unique situation because we have another subject and we have another verb. However, we don't have anything linking these two clauses together. Now I want to show you something here, and let me take this. I guess I should have had this up for you so you could see it. Now we're here on verse 1, and matter of fact, I'll show you in the interlinear. It'll be a little bit easier to see. This is the message. That which was from the beginning. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I'm on the wrong one. Here we go. Verse 5. This is the message we have heard. Now, I'm going to take this interlinear and I'm going to drag it so you can see a little bit. Now, the ESV does not translate a word right here. And I'm going to come down here. I'm going to zoom in here so you can see a little bit better. You have this word right here. This word hein here. And this word hein here is actually a relative pronoun. And in some translations, it would say this is the message which we have heard. But for some reason, the ESV doesn't translate the which right here in between this and this. And so we know that there's actually a relative pronoun connecting these two together. Now, in order to diagram a relative pronoun, I'm going to go ahead and do it, even though it's not translated in the ESV. In order to diagram a relative pronoun, we always take a slanted dashed line and bring it from one part of the diagram to the other. And so you just want to take a dashed line, just draw a slanted line like that. And remember, you got to make sure that this is selected again so you're not drawing lines. But while this is highlighted, you can come up here to the word line here. I'm going to make this, actually it's a dotted line. You make it dotted. I'm going to change the color to gray so it's not too intrusive. And so I'm going to connect these two clauses by coming up here. I'm going to slant it down. And then we have a subject, we, and the verb, have heard. And so I'm going to go ahead and get my subject and predicate out. And this is going to go like this. So we have heard. Now, so this line is showing that this is connected, but we still don't have a relative pronoun, even though the Greek has one. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a relative pronoun. So I'm going to come over to the text tab here. I'm going to make sure it's highlighted. I'm going to click. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in parentheses an X. And I'm doing an X because an X really is just representing a word that's not there in my translation. Now, if we were doing this in Greek, we wouldn't have to do it. We wouldn't have to worry about it because the relative pronoun is actually there. So I'm going to drop this substitute for relative pronoun for the English right here. And what I do with my relative pronouns is I bold them and I italicize them so that you can see that it's a relative pronoun. And we're going to do that with all of our conjunctions, and I do it a little bit different way so I can see it, and I'll show you that once I get to it. But let's take the rest of this. From him. This is the message we have heard from him. Okay, so you got a prepositional phrase here. The word from is a preposition, excuse me. And so a prepositional phrase, the way we diagram a prepositional phrase is we put the preposition in one slot, and then we put the object of the preposition in another slot. And then if there are any other modifiers like definite articles or indefinite article, the indefinite article will be the word a or the word an in English. Greek does not have any indefinite articles. So we want to take a shape that's going to have two slots in it. And the one I use for prepositional phrases is this one right here, simple modifier with an object. And we have heard it. And who have we heard it from? We've heard it from him. So the word from will go in here. And the word him will go where the object is. Now I'm going to scoot these over. I always drop my shapes in before I adjust it, because you can see the words, the labels disappear. So it makes it a little bit more convenient. So this is a message we have heard and proclaimed to you. So I'm going to move this thing over here. And by the way, if you ever need to drag several words, you just highlight or you just drag your mouse and go over what you want to drag, and you should be able to pick them all up and do it at the same time. It's very helpful instead of trying to drag one word all the time. So what we have here, we have heard and proclaimed. So really what we have here is we have a double verb, actually. So whenever we're doing double verbs, we're going to need something to connect them together. So what I'm going to do, move this here. I'm going to take this verb off. We're going to do this and bring it in a little bit more. And then we're going to get a conjunction. We need a left conjunction because it's pointing back to the subject. If we had this double subject pointing to the verb, we would do a right conjunction. But we're going to do a left conjunction. And I'm going to connect it. I'm going to move this out of the way here, and we want to kind of make it a little bit bigger. We have heard. That's your first verb. Proclaim. So those are your two verbs. So you got your double subject. We have heard it and proclaim it. Now the conjunction links this together. And so we're linking these two verbs together. Now, you might be asking, isn't it coordinating? Isn't acting as a coordinating? Well, That's typically going to be your call, but I see this as a single subject with two different verbs, because John is not saying we've heard this and then on top of that we've proclaimed it. I mean, he is, but he's using it, I think, in more of a double verb type of way. We've heard it and now we're proclaiming it. And so I did it that way. And so we've heard it from him. This goes back here. And proclaim to you. Now, there would be some question as to whether the phrase here, to you, would be a prepositional phrase, because the word to is often a preposition. But my rule of thumb is that unless it's showing some kind of emotion towards something, it's going to be a indirect object. Now, I didn't discuss indirect objects too much, but an indirect object is something that indirectly receives the action from something else and transfers it, in a sense, to another object. And so an example would be, I gave her flowers. So if you remember from our other video, matter of fact, let me type this out real quick so we can see what I'm talking about. Sometimes in Logos, when you do this, you really can't get it. There it is. And so what I would typically do is I would just copy another word and double click, because you can double click inside of these words and edit them as need. But let's take the sentence, I gave her flowers. Okay, so if you remember how to find the subject and a verb, and actually I'm going to put a space so we can see this a little bit better. I'll put 2 spaces in between each of them. And I wasn't planning on doing this, but I probably need to explain this a little bit better. So we always start with finding the verb. The verb is gave. Well, you remember how we find the subject? We ask who or what gave. I gave. So I would be the subject. Gave would be the verb. So we would diagram it. And it's not going to be able to do it here because let me see if I can make it a little bit better here. So let's do this. Sorry about that. I wasn't planning on it. So I would be the subject. Gave would be the indirect, the verb. So I gave who or what? I gave flowers. So flowers would actually be your indirect object. And, well, whoops. And then you have, flowers would be your direct object, and then you have an indirect object. Indirect object would go on the other side of the direct object. So it would actually be, let's do it this way. I. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this word. Command C, Command V. Drag it down here. It gave. And I gave what? I gave flowers. Again, sorry about this. I actually was not planning on doing this. I gave flowers, and then the her would be the indirect object. And so it would look something like this, because the indirect object is indirectly receiving the object. So I gave, and I gave flowers, but the flowers are being transferred to her. And so her would be the indirect object. So Hope that kind of makes sense. But typically people would say, well, to is a preposition, and so you would diagram it like a preposition. But again, if it's not something like I am going to the store, it's not really showing any motion towards something. And I don't know if that would be completely accurate, but that's kind of the way I work it out in my head. And so in this case, you don't really have a direct object, but you do have an indirect object. So I'm going to put that indirect object here. I'm going to bring it in a little bit closer so it's not taking up so much space. And to you. So we proclaim to you. So this is the message. This is the message which we have heard from him. We have heard and proclaimed to you. Now, we have the word that. And remember what I said about the word that. The word that is either going to function mostly as a demonstrative, or it's going to function as a relative or some type of a conjunction. And so we need to determine what the word that is referring to, or how it's functioning. And this is the message which we have heard from him and proclaimed to you, which God is light. And that doesn't make sense, does it? So we know it's not functioning as a relative pronoun, so it's got to be functioning as a demonstrative, and I think it is functioning as a demonstrative. But what is that pointing back to? Well, that we need to find the pronoun's antecedent, and an antecedent is simply something that points back to it. And so the word message, this is the message, and let's take out all of this for a minute. This is the message. This is the message, that God is light. So we know the word that is referring to the word message. So somehow we've got to make it point from message to that. And there's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can use arcs. You can use these vertical continuation. You can use an S curve. And typically I will use one of these because it is a little bit easier. And what I can do is this. I can slide the word message over and make it even smaller and bring it down. And we can, Command Z if you make a mistake. There you go. You got to drag it. And the problem is how to make it without interfering. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come right down the center here. And I'm going to take these. I'm going to make this a little bit longer and move this over here. And move this like this. This way it's not really interfering with the diagram. And so, to me it's a little bit better. So I'm going to take it. I'm going to make sure it's highlighted. When it's in yellow, it's highlighted. I'm going to take it. I'm going to make it dotted. I'm going to make it light gray so it doesn't interfere but so much. And so this is the message that I'm going to put that there. And since it's relative, I'm going to bold it and italicize it. That. And what is the message? We need our subject and our verb again. God is. Now the word light here is actually an adjective. And so what we're going to do is we're not going to use, it is functioning as a direct object, but since it's an adjective, we're going to use our predicate adjective, or you could use predicate nominative. You could use either one. It's giving a type of, well, really it's more of a predicate nominative because it's giving us a quality about who God is. And so God is light. It's giving us a characteristic of God. And so that's what I'm going to use. And the predicate nominative, it just simply pointing back to it. So you could use nominative or you could use an adjective. So it's pointing back. It's qualifying more about God. So I just went ahead and used the predicate nominative. God is light. And now we have another and. Now, is this the case like this here, or is this going to be a coordinating conjunction? So is it linking God is light, in him is no darkness at all, or is it going to be a compound verb like the other one? I would say that it's going to be a coordinating conjunction. And I say that because it's linking message, really, and this together. It's actually linking kind of all three of these, but the coordinating conjunction, the way we want to do it is we want to get a line. I'm going to go ahead and I'll copy this line here. I always like to copy and paste so I don't have to do too much drawing, but I'm going to turn this right here, and we're going to connect it to this. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go up here to this line, and I'm going to make this a dash. For coordinating conjunction, I make it a dash, and I make it a big line so we can see it. And then take the word and drop it right on top. And then for coordinating conjunctions, I just simply bold them. That God is like, and the reason why it's coordinating conjunction is because it's two different things about God. God is light, there's no darkness in him at all. And that's why I would say it's a coordinating conjunction and not a double type of a verb. So now we need subject. These are on even levels. By the way, if they're on an even level, you want to keep them even. So God is light. So now we have, I'll just take this whole phrase, in him is no darkness at all. So we have a couple different things here. We got in him is no darkness at all. So we got to find what our subject is, what our verb is. We know our verb is going to automatically be the is. It's the linking verb. So that's easy to find. But what is our subject? Is it him? Is it darkness? Is it all? Is it no? I mean, what is it? Well, one of the things you learn is that when you're finding a subject, first of all, you got to eliminate your different types of phrases. So your subject is never going to be in a prepositional phrase. So we can eliminate that. It's not him because it's part of a prepositional phrase. Him is the object of in. It's the object of the preposition in. So it's never going to be, a subject is never going to be the object of a preposition, or it's never going to be found in a prepositional phrase. And maybe you did know that, maybe you didn't. So the only thing you have left is no darkness at all. Well, all is an adjective. We can kind of eliminate that because we know all is actually, no and all are actually qualifying darkness. There's no darkness at all in him. That's another way you can say it. So darkness is going to be our subject. So darkness is. And so then you got in him. So we got to figure out, that's a prepositional phrase. What is that modifying? Is it modifying darkness, or is it modifying the verb in him? Well, there is in him no darkness at all. So it's modifying the verb. So this is the preposition goes here, the first one, which is a modifier. And him goes as the object because it is the object of the preposition. And then we got at all. Now at all is really one word. And so we're gonna treat that as one word. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drop that on a simple modifier. So no darkness. Well, let me link these two words together. By the way, you can link these words at all. And then we need no darkness. And you could actually change them around. I try to keep the order of the verse. So you have darkness, no darkness, at all darkness. So no at all darkness is in him. And so that would be all of verse 5. And so we got a lot going on here, and I told you this is going to be a long video, so I'm going to take this, scoot it up here a little bit. Now we got verses 6 and 7 to go. So let's drag our verse 6. And by the way, let me just say something. One thing I don't like about Logos is that it's not a continuous scroll. I think they should improve that in an upcoming release date or something, because you'll notice as you drag the shapes down, the page will get longer, but it's kind of a pain because sometimes you drag them down, and I've got my bar hidden. If I drag them down too far, the bar automatically comes up, and a lot of times I accidentally click on another app to open it. But anyway, that's just more of a gripe than anything else. But anyway, let's start at verse 6. Now, verse 6 is interesting because it starts with a conditional. Okay, conditional, anytime you see the word if, most of the time, it's going to be conditional. So, if we say we have fellowship with him while we walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. So, when you run into a conditional, the first thing you need to do is you need to let me move this whole thing down here first, and then I'll move the rest of it. First thing you need to do is you need to find the main subject. The conditional is never going to be the main clause. Okay, so what you want to do is when you come into a conditional, you always want to do the main clause first. So if we say we have fellowship with him while we walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. And let me move this back over here, because this goes with this. So the main clause is usually going to be your apodosis, which is the second part of the conditional. So we walk in darkness. That's actually going to be your main subject and your main verb. So let's just go with we walk. That's the subject and the verb. So we always want to start with our subject and verb. Well, let's do it here. We walk in darkness. Let's see, if we say we have fellowship with him while we walk in darkness. Oh, I'm sorry, I take that back. We lie is the actual main clause here. We lie. And again, we have a double verb. What is it that we do? We lie and we do not practice the truth. So we're going to need another conjunction here. We lie, and then your verb is actually do practice. Okay? Because remember, verbs can be made up of two words in English anyway. We're kind of the only oddball language here. We lie, and then you have your conjunction here. We lie and do not practice the truth. Now again, why is this a conjunction linking two verbs and not a coordinating conjunction? Well, you don't really have two distinct clauses. Here you have two distinct clauses. God is light. There is no darkness in him at all. Those are two independent clauses. Now, somebody could say, well, we lie. We do not practice the truth as two distinct clauses. Well, yeah, that's true, but if you look at the English version here, and I'm strictly going by the ESV here, you don't really have the we here in front of the do. And so, actually, the we is implied here in the verb. Greek uses endings on their verbs to show sometimes the subject is implied, but because we don't have that, it's going to be two separate verbs instead of a coordinating conjunction. So we lie and do practice, and truth here again is a direct object. Truth. And then we got our modifiers. Not is modifying. We do not practice. And then the definite article here is modifying truth. Okay, so we've got our main subject and our main verb. So we lie and practice the truth, and then we want to do our conditional. If we say we have fellowship with him while we walk in darkness. So we got two subordinating conjunctions here. So remember subordinating conjunctions. I'm going to copy this. Come back down here and paste it. So remember, we have to do this. I'm going to do it right off of here, right here, so it doesn't interfere. Right off the main part of the verb. We practice, and then I'm going to take this if and put it on the line there. And we're going to bold and italicize it because it is subordinating. And then, if what? If we say. So we need subject and verb. And you see what I was talking about, how that pops up, but then the page kind of scrolls down as you put the shapes in. So, okay, we got another unique thing here. We have if we say we have fellowship. So how does this work? Because you got two subjects, two verbs, and then one direct object. So how does that work? Well, again, we're going to have to substitute here like we did here, because we can take the word that. If we say that we have fellowship, and actually, if I'm not mistaken, it's the same thing as it was in that. The relative pronoun, yes, the word hati here is a conjunction. It's acting as a conjunction, but so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the exact same thing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this X. Command C, I'm going to come down here, Command V, I'm going to copy it. So we have to connect these. If we say, and then we have to connect another line here. So anytime you have a subordinating conjunction or a relative pronoun or whatever, you've got to connect them. So if we say, I'm going to put it down there. It's not working very well. Let me drop this. We have, and then fellowship would be your direct object, because we have what? Fellowship. If we say we have fellowship. So I'm going to take this if, I'm going to drop it on the slanted line because it's showing the connection, coordinating conjunction, a subordinate conjunction, connecting this clause. If I can ever get it right here. And you always want to connect right there where the verb starts. That's what at least that's what I could get from re-going over my diagramming refresher. So if we say we have fellowship, and then we have another conjunction, while, if we say that we have while we walk in darkness. So we got another one we got to connect. And sometimes these can get pretty complex. So I'm going to take the word while, and since it's subordinating, we're going to bold and italicize it. While, and then you have here. And let me go ahead and do this prepositional phrase, because this is we have fellowship with him. This is modifying here fellowship with him. Sorry about that. I meant to get that earlier. So while we have fellowship with him, or we have fellowship with him while we walk. So we need our subject and our verb. And again, I always drop them on before I adjust if I need to. And I'm going to take this and try and move this down there. Okay, so it's a little bit easier if you drag it from the top instead of the side. While we walk in darkness. And so that's modifying the verb. So we need it's a prepositional phrase. We need this. So in is the preposition. Darkness is the object. So I'm going to reposition this. And again, sometimes you just got to finagle it. While we walk in darkness. So now we have the rest of this. Let's go ahead and do all of verse 7. Highlight that. Whoops. And we're going to, not getting it all, we're going to drag the whole thing down here so we have access to it. We don't have to keep moving up and down and up and down. Okay, so if we say we have fellowship with him while we walk in darkness. So really the main idea of verse 6 is we lie and don't practice the truth. And we're liars and not practicing the truth if these things here, these clauses here, are true. We say we have fellowship with him while we walk in darkness, this one clause. So this is really kind of your main thought. And that's one thing that diagramming does, is it kind of helps you get your main thoughts and the main message of that particular passage together. So we're going to continue on with verse 7 here. I'm going to take my 7, I'm going to drag it down here, make a little bit more space. And like I said, I really wish Logos would just put a continuous scroll in here because it makes it hard to keep scrolling down like this trying to make room. Okay. So now, here's the thing. We have the word but. But is always a contrastive type of a thing. And if you're reading the context, we see that but in verse 7 begins in contrast with verse 6. So it is a coordinating conjunction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come all the way back up here. Oh, where are we at here? Oh, here we go. And I'm going to copy this line. That's what I want. I was looking for my my line here. Whoops, I did something. There we go. There we go. So Command C. I think I accidentally hit Command X. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to paste it, but we need to have it pretty long. Copying and pasting will save you a lot of time. So once you get certain shapes, you can continue to copy and paste them. I'm going to begin the but right here about verse 7 because this is the beginning of verse 7. I'm trying to actually scroll down a little bit more so I can go down farther. So I'm going to put the but here at verse 7 because this is where verse 7 begins. I'm going to go ahead and bold it because it is a coordinating conjunction. But, and again, we have this conditional phrase. If we say we walk in the light as he is in the light, but if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship one with another, and the blood of Jesus, his son, cleanses us from all sin. So let's think about this for a minute. Remember we said the conditionals are divided into two parts. You have your protasis and your apodosis. The protasis is the condition, while the apodosis is the result of the condition being met or not being met. So in this case here, the if we say we have fellowship with him while we walk in the darkness, then the apodosis, we lie and do not the truth, is the result of that. And so the apodosis is usually the head phrase. And so we come down here and we need to find the head phrase, which is we have fellowship with one another. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get my verb and my subject. Let's see, if you drag this one by the top, it works a little bit better. That's what I did. There we go. And I'm going to connect them to... I'm really messing this up. Connect them together here. Take this... Well, no, we'll keep the butt there. So, we have... And then our direct object... Fellowship. So now we have this. We have we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, His Son, cleanses us from all sin. So is this "and" here compound, or is it coordinating? And so we need to determine which of these it is. If it's coordinating, it's going to go on another line like this. Let's see. Let's see if we can move this up here to give us a little bit more space. There we go. Excuse me. So we need to make that determination before we move on, because if it's compound, we need to go ahead and take this apart and add a left conjunction, since it's pointing back to the subject. Remember, left points to the subject, right points to the verb. So we're pointing back to the subject. Or if it's coordinating, we need to add another line like this, and then add the "and." Now, I would say that, in my opinion, is that it is a compound, because there's two aspects to that. It's not two separate things. We have fellowship, and then on top of that, the blood of Jesus cleanses us. It's the fact that if the blood of Jesus cleanses us, we're going to have fellowship. And so I'm just trying to use a little bit of logic and connect these together. So I would say this is compound. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this out of the way, and we're going to do it like we did before. We'll try and condense this so we don't run into it. I'm going to bring this all the way over as I can. I'm going to get this compound here. So we have, and I'll go ahead and do this direct object. We have what? We have fellowship. And let's go ahead and do this other verb here. And we'll go ahead and put our and blood. Oh, excuse me. Oh, wait a minute. We might have a little new dynamic here. We might have a compound subject and a compound verb. So, when you have that, you got this. I didn't even see that before. So, we have fellowship and blood cleanses. And then we have another direct object. Blood cleanses who? Or what? The blood cleanses us. So it appears that we have two compound subjects along with two compound verbs. So we have fellowship and the blood of Jesus cleanses us. Now, just out of curiosity, I'm going to open my other document here, and I'm going to see how I did this before. Let me, well, you know what? I won't do that. I'll leave it for here right now. If somebody is a better diagrammer than me, please, I encourage you to please correct me if I'm wrong, because I do want to be right on this. We have fellowship, and then with one another. So this, and again, this one another is kind of acting as a single unit, so I'm not going to diagram them separately. One another is kind of, even though it's two words in English, I'm treating it as one unit. Kind of like you would if you said peanut butter and jelly. I don't know if you would diagram that as two different subjects, but to me they're a single unit. And that's why I'm diagramming this as a single unit. We have fellowship with one another, and blood cleanses us. So the blood and blood of Jesus. And so that's actually modifying blood as well. Oh, wait a minute. I got the wrong one. Because it's a... technically in Greek, this would be a genitive. And I'm not going to go over genitives, but I'm going to move this down here. But we're still going to treat it as a prepositional phrase. The blood of Jesus. So of is the preposition. Jesus is the object. Now, we also have something else going on here. We have what's called an appositive. And an appositive is something that... I don't want to say renames, but it qualifies a noun in a different way than it would be if it was a verb. So, for an example, George the teacher. Okay, so teacher is the same as George. George is the same as teacher. And so what we call that is we call that an apposition. So the noun teacher is standing in apposition to the noun George. It's basically telling us something about George without actually putting in a verb in it. So it's different than George is the teacher. So you wouldn't diagram it like you would, a verb. So what we do is we take our text here, take the text tool, and just put an equal sign because it's equaling something else. So in this case, Jesus is equal to son. And so then we have the modifier for son, his, which would go under son. Blood, the blood of Jesus equals son. Blood cleanses us. It cleanses from what? And again, we have a prepositional phrase, from, and then the object of the preposition is sin. And then all is modifying sin, because how much sin? All sin. And so that's a modifier in and of itself. And so we're going to put that underneath the word sin. And again, if you ever make a mistake, just hit Command Z on the Mac, Control Z on your PC. And so we have the main clause here diagrammed. So now all we got left is this this conditional, the first part of the conditional here. So what I want to do is I want to take this part next, and remember we're going to do it the exact same way as we did it. It's going to work off of these two subjects and two verbs. And again, I am kind of curious as how I did this one and the original one. Because I certainly didn't do it. I don't remember doing it as a compound subject. We have fellowship and the blood cleanses us. But I'm seeing it as connected, not as separate type, not as coordinating, I guess I should say. So if I'm wrong, I guess I'm wrong. Somebody can correct me on it. I'd be glad to to do it the correct way, but this is how I'm seeing it right now. But let's go ahead and diagram this and go ahead and finish this up, because I've been going for a while now. So we do it the same way. We're going to need our slanted line, so I'm just going to click on this slanted line and make sure it's highlighted. Command C, Command V. And we're going to connect it with the main clause, with the clause here. I'm just going to connect it from this one right here, this side of the conjunction. And we're going to go down a little bit. I'm going to put the if right over the top of the line here. And I'm going to command bold and italicize it. So if, go ahead and do the subject and the verb, we walk. And I'm going to go ahead and do my all of my modifiers and then just connect it all together. So if we walk, and in light, so we've got a prepositional phrase. And then we've got the word, the definite article, the, modifying light. Now we have another something unique here. We've got another as. The word as is a conjunction, and it's a comparative conjunction. So it's telling us if we're doing something like somebody else. It's telling us like something. But we still treat it as a subordinated conjunction. So we're going to need another line. So if we're walking as, I'm going to do it down here. And again, bold and italics. As he is. Trying to get this as close as possible here. If you ever have a problem with these shapes, you can always come up here to display. Show shape handles. Kind of makes it look a little bit messy, but it can be helpful. I typically don't use it because if you hover over, you can see where the little circle is, and I just grab it by that. So he is. And then we have in the light. So the same thing as this. It'd be the exact same thing. So you have your prepositional phrase. In light. In is the preposition. Light is the object of the preposition. And then you have the definite article the. Modifying light. And now we got to take all of this and move it down here to this here. And there you go. That is 1 John 1, 5 through 7. And again, taking this clause as a contrast, the main idea is contrasting with verse 6. And you know what, I don't even want to I don't want to move it too far, but I do want to get it kind of up. So the main idea of verse 6 is that we're liars and we don't have the truth of God in us if we're doing this down here. But the contrast is we are having fellowship with God, and we do this if this is true here. And so just remember, when you're doing conditionals, you always want to diagram your hypothesis first, which is the result of the if part. So that's always going to be your head part. But anyway, one last thing, if you need to print this off, let me move this over here. You can always, in Logos, of course, hit Command P, or you can just go to here and print. But you can see we got 3 pages. And a simple way to do this is to fit to the page. and you got it all right here. Now, you might be thinking, okay, well, that's small. Yeah, well, it is. Well, a good thing at least about a Mac. I don't know about PC, but if you do a PFD document, I'm just going to leave it like this. I'm going to leave it on the desktop. I'm going to save it because I'm going to show you this. Pull it up here. Here it is right here. Now, oh, wrong one. There it is right there. PDF. There we go. Now, yeah, it does look small, but you can click it a couple of times, and you can just do a whole scroll like that and scroll continuously. And the cool thing about Preview, at least on the Mac, is you can, if you go to here and you show your toolbar, view, and look for show markup toolbar, and you can put all kinds of stuff. You can put shapes in there. You can put add text. You can just do all kinds of things. You can change the colors of them. Just do all kinds of things and make notes. You could use this as a teaching outline or whatever. But anyway, I hope that this has been helpful, and hopefully I've been clear in my explanations. I don't always articulate the best, but hopefully this will be helpful to you. Thanks for watching. If you want to see something else, just drop me a line on the Logos Tips page on Facebook. Thanks, everybody.